It's just the sixth meeting ever between Ole Miss and Georgia Tech, and the first time the two teams have ever played in Oxford. Andy, it won't be your first trip to Oxford, but the first one for the Jackets. A little crazy to think that Georgia Tech and Ole Miss were in the same conference, the SEC, for 30 years, and yet never a game played in Oxford, and only 5 previous meetings all time.
Yeah, Georgia Tech and Ole Miss were charter members of the SEC in 1933. So it only took 90 years, but yes, Georgia Tech finally gets its road regular season matchup in Oxford. We're looking forward to it.
Andy, always good to catch up with you. Always good to hear from you. It felt like when the change was made at head coach a year ago, something kind of clicked. This Georgia Tech team a year ago played really hard for Brent Key. He ultimately gets the opportunity to become the head coach. And things look different offensively, especially early this year. What's different in your mind from where things were at the beginning of the season when Ole Miss and Tech played last year to where they are right now?
Oh, man, night and day. That was an afternoon in Bobby Dodd that a lot of Georgia Tech fans would like to forget. And anytime that subject has been broached this week, Georgia Tech players and coaches have been quick to dismiss it. They're not trying to deny what happened, but they only want to look forward, not back. But I'll tell you what, give Brent Key a lot of credit because in 8 weeks, he clearly put his imprint and his identity on that Georgia Tech team. They played tough. They played disciplined. They kind of played in his image. And they go from 1-3 and looking really listless to finishing 5-7, but 4-4 under Brent Key and winning 2 games on the road against ranked opponents, which, whether it's front of mind or not, I think should give this Georgia Tech team a little bit of confidence heading into Vaughn Hemingway. They went on the road and beat a Pitt team that was ranked on a night game in Pittsburgh last year. They did the same thing to North Carolina when the Tar Heels were 9-1 last year. That was also a night game in Chapel Hill, and I think that's a reflection of the way that Brent Key has the attitude centered in this Georgia Tech team. So it's been fun to see that turnaround, and I'm excited to see the continued evolution of this program under head coach Brent Key.
Andy, is there a learning how to win process that has to happen for a program that has struggled for a period of time? And I hesitated to ask it that way because of what you just said a second ago, where there are 4 wins under Brent Key to close out the season a year ago, but finished just shy of bowl eligibility. But more about that Louisville game, right? It was there for the taking on that Friday night to open the season. That one kind of slipped away. They beat South Carolina State last week. But in terms of going on the road, playing pretty good teams, do you have to learn how to win?
Yeah, and you know what? Even in those wins they had with Brent last year, Georgia Tech wasn't, letting leads slip away. So I can't say what we saw against Louisville had been a recurring theme since Brent took over. Even since last year, Richard, he said, look, we have to stop thinking bad things are going to happen. We have to expect to win. And that attitude really permeated the program. With the Louisville game, they were unstoppable offensively. Georgia Tech was in the second quarter. They struggled gaining yardage on first down, and I think being behind the chains really hampered them offensively. And I gave up some chunk plays to Louisville, missed some tackles that proved costly. But even then, in that second half versus Louisville, Georgia Tech missed a 32-yard field goal. They got strip-sacked inside the red zone. Louisville recovered. If both of those drives ended in field goals, the final score would have been 40-39 Tech instead of 39-34 Louisville. So while I agree that with teams that are adjusting to a new head coach, there is an element of truth and you have to learn how to win, but I think this team showed it had a pretty quick learning curve under Brent Key in how to win and how to close out games on the road. We saw that last year, and they'll certainly try to follow that same script on Saturday.
Andy, talk to me a little bit about Haynes King. It's a name that most people recognize because he was highly sought after out of high school. It didn't work at Texas A&M, though you saw some injuries that were mixed in, and you saw some flashes. He gets a fresh start, and boy, has it been a good start to the year.
Yeah, he was part of that Texas A&M liquidation sale in the transfer portal, was he not? But, Haynes King has been a boon for this Georgia Tech offense. It was a competitive, well-contested quarterback competition in the preseason between him and Zach Pyron, who's a sophomore. But, golly, it's hard to argue with the decision to make him QB1. 7 touchdowns, through the first two games. That lone interception was on the very first series of the first game. So he's had 7 consecutive touchdown passes without a pick. And he hasn't done anything too spectacular, but he's done the things that they need of him. Under Georgia Tech's new offensive coordinator, Buster Faulkner, and I do love the fact that we're going to Oxford after 90 years, and who's our offensive coordinator? A guy named Faulkner. So I enjoy that little tidbit, that subplot that we bring into Saturday. However, with Haynes King, he knows how to make all the right throws. He's risk-averse as a quarterback, but in a good way. I think he's got some agility that people may underestimate in him. He's a long strider, so he can break off, scramble, and get some yards. And, you know, I think his experience starting in road SEC environments will really benefit him on Saturday. Let's not forget, he came within a cat's breath of beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa a couple of years ago with Texas A&M. So I don't think his knees will be quivering at Vaughn Hemingway Stadium, and you hope from Georgia Tech's standpoint that that kind of poise and composure will rub off on the rest of his teammates. But he's been conducting this offense well, getting the ball out quickly, getting it to the spots where it needs to go, and Georgia Tech has had a promising, albeit limited, sample size of offense so far under Haynes King.
Well, and another kind of crazy little nugget with Haynes King, he's never faced Ole Miss. I mean, he obviously was on teams at Texas A&M that did, but he never played in a game against Ole Miss. So we'll see how that shakes out. He's got another year after this year, right? Or is it 2 more?
Yeah, redshirt sophomore, so he could have 3 years potentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to figure out, you know, unless you really go year by year. It's like, okay, how much eligibility is left? So that's a big deal, though, right? I mean, once he wins the job, and, you know, everybody has dreams of the NFL, but if you don't do that right away, to look at the potential for stability at that position over an extended period of time.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the reasons they were attracted to him in the transfer portal, is knowing they could theoretically have him for 3 years. Now, this is his 4th year in college football. They only list him as a redshirt sophomore because if you look at Georgia Tech's rosters, they don't count the COVID year towards anybody's eligibility.
Okay.
But, yeah, he arrived at Texas A&M in 2019, so he's got a lot of football still ahead of him, but he's also played a lot of football already. So it's almost the best of 2 worlds with Haynes King.
Andy, when you look at the matchup between Georgia Tech and Ole Miss, what stands out to you as kind of a key for this game?
Prevent Quinshon Judkins from gaining 300 yards. Though I think that's pretty consistent with anybody who tries to stop him. Look, I think Georgia Tech has had a little bit of unevenness in their tackling the first 2 games. I talked with Brent Key for our coach's radio show earlier today, and through 2 games, Georgia Tech still does not have a sack, and they have only had 4 tackles for loss. And I asked Brent, does that concern you, or do you take that in context because of the schemes that your defense has faced? He goes, no, I'm very concerned. So I think for Georgia Tech, a big key is to try to find those negative, disruptive plays, which haven't really materialized so far. I think that Georgia Tech offensively, they have to be efficient converting on 3rd downs. They've converted 52% on 3rd downs, which is an encouraging start, but we also know Pete Golding's defense. They love to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, especially in predictable down distance situations. So they'll need to execute well and those 3rd and medium, 3rd and manageable situations to extend drives, to sit on clock, prevent Ole Miss from going at that warp speed. And then defensively, I think they got to limit the explosives, and they got to find some of those TFLs that have kind of been a little hit or miss for them through these first 2 games.
Andy, last thing, only about a minute left. Vegas obviously has an opinion on the game. They've got Ole Miss as a big favorite. Does that surprise you at all that it's as big as it is, almost 3 touchdowns?
You know, I try not to get too much into the thinking and rationale behind those lines, but look, Ole Miss beat Georgia Tech 42-zip last year. They're playing at home. They're a ranked team. So I get it to a certain extent, but again, I would add the caveat that this Georgia Tech team was a pretty heavy underdog when they went to Chapel Hill last year against a North Carolina team that had Drake May, that was ranked number 12, and they were down 17-0, but they came back to win that sucker 21-17. Brent Key's first game as interim head coach, which was 5 days after Jeff Collins was let go, was against a ranked Pittsburgh team at Acrisure Stadium. They go out, they win that game. So he's shown some ability to have moxie and really rally the troops, circle the wagons with his team when they're on the road as an underdog in a night environment. So we'll see if that might change things come Saturday night. So, I'll let you take with that information what you will. But Brent has shown that they're a pretty tough team to contend with on the road.
6:30 kickoff on Hemingway Stadium Saturday night. Andy, always good to catch up. Thanks so much for the time this afternoon.
Oh, no problem. Happy to do it anytime.
It's Andy Demetra. He's the voice of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets joining us on